Beth Bilson was an iconic force at the University of Saskatchewan and across Canada's legal community. A trailblazer, a fierce advocate for women's rights, and a champion of equity for many marginalized people. While her death on August the 13th, 2025 was a profound loss, her legacy continues to light the way forward. In this special bonus edition of Dear Beth, we celebrate one of her most meaningful contributions, a work that not only reflects her vision, but also inspires the next generation to keep building a more just and inclusive legal profession. I'm Jen Quesnel, and this is Dear Beth, a Women in Law podcast. Creating a Seat at the Table, Reflections from Women in Law, well, it's more than just a book. It's a legacy of insight and courage. Now, it was co-authored by Beth Bilson, together with her friends and colleagues Leah Howie and Brea Lowenberger. This book gathers powerful first-person stories from women in the legal profession, and their voices shed light on the barriers and breakthroughs of building a career in law. They remind us how much progress we've made and how much more work still lies ahead. Today, I'm deeply honored to welcome back Leah and Brea into the studio, along with Kate Bilson, Beth's daughter, a lawyer herself. Together, we'll reflect on the significance of this project, the continuing challenges women face in law, and why the message of this book resonates now more than ever. Kate, Brea, Leah, welcome.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Jen. It's nice to be here.
It is good to be here again. I've missed this.
I know, it's kind of weird. And I'm glad we're here today. It's sad. We're missing one key person, but it's also a time that we can reflect and kind of look at Beth's incredible contributions. And I brought some tape along, so I hope it's okay if we start with someone who knew Beth really well, who understood the mark she was making. This is Honorable Justice Georgina Jackson.
Beth Bilson started university in 1969 and graduated law school in 1978. As one of the organizers of the book, her story isn't in it. Beth's story will be written elsewhere, but in many respects, her story is the book, or the book is her story. She followed and participated in much of the change. She was part of it, and she was making it. She was the chair of the Bilson Report, which was an independent pay equity task force that conducted a review of the Canadian Human Rights Act and made recommendations. You can see her story in the choices that she made to be involved in education, labor law, arbitrations, and being the first woman chair of the Labor Relations Board. We can also see it in who she chose to be authors in this book. I have to say, we owe a debt of gratitude to all of the organizers. But today we're talking about Beth. Making space for others was one of her defining characteristics.
Justice Georgina Jackson sharing some of the most significant contributions Beth made. And Leah, that's just the start of a long list, isn't it? Let's start with you. What did you find most inspiring about Beth?
It was interesting. I was making my comments for this, and they were all about Beth as a person and a mentor. And a leader, and then listening to Justice Jackson, I also thought, and of course she had this incredible career too, and one thing about her career that I think was so inspiring is the work that she chose to take on and like the excellence that she brought to everything she did. And I think it's rare to have somebody who excels as a lawyer, as a professor, as a senior university administrator. Like excellence in all those things is remarkable. But that wasn't what I initially wanted to talk about. I just needed to mention it now at the outset. What I actually was reflecting on about what I found most inspiring about her was she was a woman of deep, deep integrity. My observation was that she truly lived her values and her ethics, and that is, to me, the definition of someone who lives with integrity. My sense of what her values and ethics would be service and excellence, rationality, and logical problem solving. I really enjoyed that about her. And then the immense amount of care she showed for people in her life and the broader community. Her work ethic was incredible and inspiring. It boggles my mind that Brea and I co-presented with her on the impact of the book and podcast at a national conference of people interested in law reform and access to justice just a few months ago in May. And that's incredible to me that we were still working with her and she was still presenting in May. One thing that I found really inspiring about her and that I appreciated was her ability to truly appreciate how incremental changes are creating progress. And I found that very inspiring and helpful when I would start to feel frustrated or demoralized. She would say, things are a lot better than they were in 1970s when she started her career. And it was helpful to have that kind of wisdom be shared with you, that it's not always about like huge wins and huge victories, but there is progress and incremental change. So I appreciated her wisdom too.
Over to you, Brea. What do you, just looking at it, what stands out about Beth, the person?
Building off Leah's comments, I was always, so inspired by Beth's work ethic as well and spirit of service. Another example, the conference was one thing, but in true impeccable Beth work ethic form, she was determined to co-design this very bonus episode, of the podcast through to the last week she was with us. With this episode of the podcast focused on what's needed now to keep things progressing for women in law and improvements to the justice system. It really ties into Beth's passion for seeing things progress and, as Leah said, improve incrementally and in big ways, and her dedication to contributing her wisdom and skills to help. Beth's impeccable work ethic is just one of the many superlatives that can be used to describe her. As many had the opportunity, and I'm sure many listeners had the opportunity to observe from different vantages of knowing her, Beth was, and Leah alluded to this, a model for composing a life aligned with one's values. She was always in service of others, and she touched countless lives for the better. Her warmth, curiosity, quick humor, strong intellect, unchanging stability and integrity made her magnetic to anyone she crossed paths with. I think at the heart of Beth's magnetism and resulting positive impact in so many and such a variety of circles over her years is the humility, authenticity, and wisdom that she imparted in all her interactions. I guess to sum it up, you were a better person for knowing Beth.
And she really did live those values. That's what strikes me about her. Like, wow. I mean, Kate, you're her daughter, and you could see, yes, the professional side, but you also saw things in life that were just you and your mom. And what would you say were some of the things that she was most proud of professionally or on a personal level?
That's a great question. My mom was probably the most humble person that I've ever known. She accomplished so many things in her career and in her community, but was never one to speak boastfully about any of it. As Brea mentioned already, she really saw her work about being in service to others, the university, her students, the legal profession, the province, the public. If I think about what she was most proud of professionally, Mom was proud of the contributions she made to the growth of her beloved University of Saskatchewan. She enjoyed seeing it progress over her 6 decades on campus, first as a student, which included time on the Student Association Executive, and then as a faculty member and senior administrator. In addition, she was incredibly proud of her teaching career. Connecting with her students and seeing their own contributions was a great source of pride. I think that finding new ways to ensure everyone's voice could be heard, be it at a board table, in the classroom, a hearing room, or otherwise, excited her and informed all of the work that she did. She herself once said that she didn't intentionally set out to be a trailblazer for women, but I do think that she was glad she could be and play that role, and that she was ultimately pleased with the contributions she was able to make to advance the rights of women and the rights of the marginalized, and the strength of their voices, not only in the legal profession, but generally. Mom also took great satisfaction from helping others to advance their own lives. She believed in encouraging others to reach their full potential and in supporting their efforts to do so. Acts of kindness and support were one of her trademarks. What my brother and I are continuing to learn now is how many people she impacted in this way that we never knew about. On a personal level, I think the things she was proud of were not about herself, but about others. She was intensely proud of her family. The paths her siblings took to each be themselves and pave their own rewarding lives were important to her. My decision to go to law school, as well as my brother's decision to do so, surprised her. Neither one of us ever planned to. But I think Mum was very proud of our own legal careers and our commitments to community, both within our professional communities and beyond. She always taught us about the inherent responsibility we have as lawyers and citizens to give back. And I think she enjoyed seeing us grow in our careers and volunteer contributions. Her grandson was a huge source of pride. Those two spent many hours together. She clearly made a big impression on him. They shared a great love of learning, always sending each other notes and articles or chatting about something they were reading or thinking about. Their travel adventures always included time at museums or events where they could learn something new together. In some way, each of our lives reflects Mum's influence. And I can't finish answering this question without mentioning how proud she was to be from and live in Saskatchewan. There were opportunities for her to go elsewhere over the years, but nowhere compared in quite the same way. She loved the province and its people and strongly believed that there was something incomparable about her university, the Saskatchewan Bar, and the greater community here.
I think she's right. And, when you mentioned that sense of humility about all the things you're proud of, I remember, because we were all at her memorial service, I remember someone mentioned you were starting to go through some of the boxes and you start pulling out like trophies and awards and things you didn't even know about. What happened?
Well, my brother and I continue to giggle about that because we have been at a few events in our life as her children where people are describing her accomplishments and we look at each other and say, "Did you know she did that?" "No, did you?" And in fact, one of my favorite stories is when she got her Queen's Counsel designation. She didn't tell us herself. I was watching the 6 o'clock news on CBC, and the first story was about 12 lawyers in the province who'd just been given their Queen's Counsel designation, including Beth Bilson, Dean of Law.
You were like, wait a second. Yeah, I know her. She didn't mention that last time I saw her. Well, and I know that Justice Jackson kind of made a point about talking about education. It's crucial to many of society's problems. Education was so important to Beth. It was one of those tools she used to bring about change. And I'm throwing it to you now, Brea. As one of her former students, what would you say struck you most about Beth Bilson, the educator?
Yeah. I took administrative law from educator Beth and enjoyed her teaching so much. I sought out all the other classes she taught, labor and employment law, etc. What struck me most was the defining characteristic that Beth herself was a lifelong learner. She was an intellectual heavyweight, continuing to publish through these last couple years. There's actually a book launch of which she wrote a chapter in happening in this month. You also benefited from her ongoing experience as a practitioner and arbitrator. She not only taught the law, being a student in Beth's classes was like sitting and listening to an engaging history podcast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, and that's why the book, Creating a Seat at the Table, in itself, it's kind of an educational tool, I guess. And I mean, Leah, what would you say are some of the ways that you've seen this book bringing people together and sparking conversations?
Well, I know the book has been used as a catalyst or as a source for a variety of book club types of discussions. I've been invited to 2 of those, which have been really fun to go to, and they were both chances to meet with young women lawyers and students, actually. One was a student group. And those meetings did create community and a space to talk about the various challenges attendees were facing. So I think those conversations are really important and really powerful, especially for younger lawyers and law students. And I've also been told, just in conversation that the book has led to many interesting conversations between a variety of people, and I haven't been part of all of those conversations, but I know they're happening. I've also had many conversations individually with readers, both at home at our law school in the province, and also across the country. Actually, people have approached me and wanted to talk about the book. So I've been in some of these conversations. I know broader conversations are happening, and I'm delighted about that.
How about you, Brea, in terms of the responses to the book? Any surprises there for you?
Well, you've heard me talk about my graduate work on reflective practice, individual and collective reflective practice and legal education throughout season 1 of the podcast. And it's been so meaningful for me to see how the theoretical underpinnings of our approach to the book, the promise of individual and collective reflection, creating community, and ideally transformative change. It's been a pleasant surprise to see how that's worked. I've been pleasantly surprised about the variety of ways in which the book has been picked up, as Leah mentioned, from our local Women in Law Student Club to, I know, the Canadian Bar Association Women's Law Forum in BC, to being told it's being used, for example, in judicial training in Alberta. The numerous ways in which, the stories in the book and podcast are reaching different audiences is really exciting to hear.
And Kate, in terms of you, just knowing that anyone who picks up this book or who comes and listens to this podcast, that they get to tap into that guidance and that wisdom from your mom, where does that leave you now?
Well, I think from my perspective, the existence of this book and the podcast are really one of the greatest gifts that I have at the moment. Mom lent such a calm and steady tone to everything that she did. She was never easily flustered, and she could always step back and breathe while she assessed what the path forward should look like. And that part of her has always helped me immensely in many aspects of my life. The chance to see her wisdom and guidance in the context of our shared profession and our shared passion for labor and employment law and administrative law, as well as her incredible passion for this particular project, has made a profound difference in my own growth as a lawyer and the personal style that I've developed towards my own work. Mom absolutely loved her role as a mentor, so the fact that the book and podcast can serve as practical extensions to that aspect of her is intensely meaningful. One of the threads that runs through the series is Mom's intrinsic belief that everyone can become what they want to be and that everyone has a role to play in the success of any given initiative. Her approach to leadership always included that belief that everyone on her team mattered and that everyone's work contributed to the outcome. When she was appointed to chair the Labor Relations Board, she inherited an executive assistant who went on to become a good friend. At one point, her EA told her that Mom was the first leader she had who had shown any interest in her as a person and who had done things like ask her how her weekend was or what she was enjoying with her family. Those seemingly minor courtesies allowed the EA to feel a stronger sense of belonging and led her to feel more confident in her own abilities. With Mom's support and mentorship, the EA grew into new professional roles and responsibilities. That story has stayed with me as an example of what leadership should ideally be, helping others to grow in their own fulfillment. She's been described as a legend, and I think the book and podcast keep her accessible to those who knew her and to the generations to come. But for me, on a personal note, being able to continue hearing her voice through the podcast will bring immeasurable comfort. I miss being able to call her.
Yeah, it's funny just the impact she had on people and that unflappableness about Beth Bilson. That is so true. And we've been hearing from the readers of Creating a Seat at the Table. Have a listen.
My name is Katerina Kostaha, and I am a lawyer with McKercher LLP based out of the Regina office. The book sort of shares and talks about the different ways that we as women, as individuals, as a profession can contribute to a positive community, ways in which we haven't contributed to community. But in addition, the book itself has just grown my community. It's created a conversation point for myself and other women about what we've experienced, and given us some verbiage to go forward with that. So as a young lawyer reading the book, I feel like the themes and conversations and learnings have also helped equip me better for navigating the legal landscape, both for myself and how to uplift and support other women in this community. I think I would just emphasize the value of reading the book in its entirety from cover to cover, but then also as a bit of a guidebook or a playbook in the future. I know there's been a few times where I've gone back to specific chapters because they've resonated with an experience I had earlier that week, or I've referred friends to specific chapters based off of conversations they've had. So I think I would emphasize the different ways the book can contribute to our understanding. And I think the next chapter would just continue telling these stories, continue telling the stories of women of color in this profession, of different levels and types of training, lawyers who are coming to Canada and their experiences alongside women proceeding in the profession with children, these young partners. I think it's just telling more stories because that is such a powerful form of advocacy.
That's Katerina Kostaha, a lawyer with McKercher in Regina. And Leah, I could see you making notes actually there. What was going through your mind as you listened to her?
Lots, actually, picking up on what Kate was just saying about Beth's mentorship. And I think it's really interesting that she described using the book as a bit of a guidebook or playbook and recommending it to her friends and colleagues. And that struck me as a really interesting and encouraging use of the book, and that the stories of all the 18 women contributors to that book are actually being used in kind of a form of, I guess, passive mentorship. I'm not sure what we would call it, but I think it's really interesting to think about the fact that you could read someone else's story and take guidance from that, even if you're not directly hearing from that person. So that's a pretty unique element of the book, and I was interested to hear her talk about that. Other things that went through my mind, I thought it was really interesting that she described storytelling as a form of advocacy. I agree with her completely on that. And I think it's interesting that lawyers are trained to be advocates. That's one of the things that we want our law students to be able to be when they leave law school, but we aren't necessarily training them to be storytellers, even though I think many people would say that the best courtroom advocates, at least, are very effective storytellers. But then there's a distinction between telling someone else's story and telling your own story. And that distinction, telling your own story, is a form of advocacy on behalf of yourself and others. And it does require bravery and vulnerability and authenticity, which I think we see from all the contributors to that book and everyone who's been on this podcast too. And I guess I hope that our profession continues to improve conditions or make space for people to be able to tell their stories and have them be received, be listened to and received with empathy. And then one final thought that went through my mind is that we did start the book with a quote from Maria Campbell that was, "Stories are a way that we can talk to each other without having barriers between us." And I think her comments speak to how the book hopefully achieved that too.
I was struck by the same two kind of themes of what Katerina so eloquently said. I was very excited to hear that the book has served as a tool to grow her community, and thought it was really interesting, the description of it being used as a playbook that she's gone back to as well. And, you know, her final comment about stories as a form of advocacy, I think is really what makes this book special and hopefully helpful for many people for many years to come.
I know this isn't on script, but who chose Maria Campbell to give that forward?
Oh, the quote? I think we all collectively, because Maria was we had like a day-long workshop with all the contributors. So Kate was there as well, and Maria did a story bundle writing exercise with our group. So she was involved with the project from the outset, and so we were, I think, kind of looking for something that we could perhaps reference her and her wisdom to start that book, and got her permission, of course, to use that quote as well. But I think one of the three of us, I think, I can't remember who.
So eloquently sums up the essence of what we're hoping to achieve with the book, and Maria's contribution, well, to each of us throughout the years and in assisting with the workshop that we held with all of the contributors in terms of that collective reflection component of the project. The book wouldn't be the product that it is without Maria's contributions at the workshop and otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, story first. Stories as advocacy. And I love that sense of the book as a playbook. Like, I'm not sure. I just got to go back and check. Maybe I could get something from this. And we actually have more listeners who've been wanting to weigh in. I'd like for you to hear from Anita Fraser, who's a partner at McKercher's Saskatoon office.
I think one of the key takeaways for me from the book was just a sense of kind of acknowledgement of shared experiences and feeling validated in terms of your impressions and feelings as being a woman in the practice of law. Sometimes as lawyers, we are very much advocates for equality, but it can be hard to acknowledge that sometimes we don't have the same equality within our own profession. During the course of your legal career, it doesn't matter what phase you're at. I think there are different points of recognition where you look back or you observe the profession and you see it differently. And I think the book is really important because you see those observations that you will likely make on your own being validated by the other people around you. I think there is a lot of power in having that sense of shared experience. You can gain resilience from community, from creating those connections with other lawyers who have shared experiences. There are definitely a lot of global changes and developments that are going on very close to home, if not kind of in our own backyard, that are calling into question certain thoughts and values that we thought were important to society, and those are maybe being challenged on a global scale. And so I think it's really caused a lot of women, myself included, to reflect on being grateful for where we live, but also looking to see where we're still vulnerable in terms of protecting our rights.
That's Anita Fraser, a partner at McKercher here in Saskatoon. And Kate, I know that your mom was a big proponent of creating a seat at the table, not just for women, but for people in all sorts of marginalized groups. How does creating spaces for those voices advance what she was all about?
I think I'd like to start with something that Justice Jackson said about my mom, and Justice Jackson was one of her very dear friends. She said that making space for others was one of Beth's defining characteristics. I think from the beginning, Mom taught her children that differences between people can make for a richer experience and provide a catalyst for positive change. She was deeply troubled over the last couple of years about the state of the world and what was going on. And I think the backtracking that she was seeing across the world, but also within the legal profession itself, in terms of acceptance and building on the strength of differences. One of the things that I always observed in her was her incredibly strong ability to listen to other people. She didn't need to hear her own voice all the time. In fact, she didn't want to hear her own voice all the time. She found that listening to others and hearing their perspectives provided a more cohesive sense of a situation. It best informed how she could structure moving forward. And it was also critical for her to understand the experiences of the marginalized. She never presumed to know better about those experiences that she had not herself lived. And I think she also believed that progress could only come in listening, and that it was a fundamental social responsibility to create seats for the marginalized. And she put in a lot of intentional effort to that fundamental belief, not because it was something on her checklist, but because she deeply believed that that was what needed to happen. And if I think about the contexts within which I work and volunteer now, the foundational principles that guided Mom's life have proven true time and again. Giving voice to the marginalized allows for heightened empathy, a truer sense of social realities and how to effect positive change, and an enhanced richness in our interactions and the outcomes of our work. And for me, that is one of the strongest models that I've taken away from my mother, is to always listen to others and to take into account every perspective.
Progress could only come in listening. You said it, Kate. I know Anita mentioned it. Those global changes that are taking place right now, some of the backsliding we see on women's rights, certainly on the rights of minorities. What role do you see this book playing, Brea and Leah, when it comes to upholding and defending those rights?
I think the biggest role the book is going to play, and it's going to be obviously a minor role, but I think the book can help support the women and other people that are doing this important work. So when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking of one of my favorite quotes from the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said, "Women belong in all places where decisions are being made." And I couldn't agree more. And I think not only do women belong in those places, but given the state of the world, what you were just talking about, women are desperately needed in all of those places. And we've heard from many readers that they found the book encouraging and validating. We know we need women in private and public leadership roles. To prepare for this, I actually did pull out a few quick quotes from articles that I want to share. I had to do a little bit of research. The World Economic Forum, for instance, has recently published a report showing that countries with higher female representation in government are more prosperous. The United Nations recognizes that women's equal participation and leadership in political and public life are essential to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. However, a recent report by the United Nations shows that women are underrepresented at all levels of decision-making worldwide. In Canada, we have 30% of members of parliament are women. In Saskatchewan, 21% of our elected MLAs from our current governing party are women. And then I started to look at what makes women good leaders. I got curious about this question. And I found a 2023 Forbes article talking about research on women in leadership roles in the private sector that concluded that women are more effective than men in all leadership measures due to the fact that they lead from a creative mindset and build and cultivate stronger connections. A 2024 article from Forbes gave the following 5 reasons why women are needed. Women have exceptional leadership skills, they prioritize well-being, they value flexible working, they're inclusive, and they forge strong relationships. And then the article also says, despite the clear advantages to having women in leadership, in the private sector, women are underrepresented. At home, closer to home, in 2024, 42% of active lawyers in Saskatchewan were women. This is a slight increase from 41% in 2023, but obviously less than 50%, and the College of Law has been graduating equal numbers of men and women for decades. Disappointingly, results from the Law Society of Saskatchewan recent survey of articling students found that 23% of respondents had experienced discrimination or harassment during their articling year. Less than half of those individuals reported the incidents, so more work needs to be done at home, too. So I think the book could hopefully play a small part in keeping women going, because women need to keep going and take up space where decisions are being made. It's exhausting doing the work of advocating on behalf of others and on behalf of society, while at the same time needing to advocate for yourself. And I think Anita spoke about that, the need for resilience. And I think the book does highlight the resilience that so many of those contributors have shown. I was also encouraged to see in the impact study that we did that so many respondents said the book and podcast validated their own experience and inspired them to continue. So that's good. I also hope that some of the stories in the book and the podcast might lead women to critically reflect on our own behavior at times towards other women and members of equity-deserving groups and encourage us to do better and figure out what more proactive steps we can be taking. I also hope the book can play a small role in increasing empathy and awareness, and that this will lead to men feeling encouraged and inspired to develop their allyship skills so they can support and promote, or at least get out of the way, of more women and members of equity-deserving groups stepping into positions of leadership and influence. So I guess to sum up, I would say everyone has a role to play in making sure rooms and tables where decisions are being made are full of people who represent the diverse society we live in. I hope this book encourages us to notice who's there, who's not there, and figure out what privilege and power we can each leverage to bring in who's not there.
Well, and there's empirical evidence, as you just mentioned, that shows if you don't have those women in the room, if you don't have people from underrepresented groups, you're not as rich. You're weaker. What occurs to you just thinking about, okay, how do we not backslide on these rights right now, Brea?
Yeah, well, and that's exactly it when it comes to upholding and defending women's rights. Women and allies to women need to remain vigilant. As the common phrase goes, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And traditional history is often being recorded by men, focusing on men and male kind of resume style accomplishments, often overlooking the key roles women have played in history. So I'm ever grateful in terms of the role our book has to play. And Leah, Beth, and I every single, contribution that came in. We were thrilled in that our contributors responded to our invitation to go beyond the resume style of recording accomplishments. Our book includes personal and collective narrative of women in law from such a variety of backgrounds. And having these women's stories documented is helpful for a more complete understanding of the past and for inspiring future generations. So I think having that recording is a really powerful thing in not repeating the past.
Well, and I love what you said there about having women having this, but also their allies. Have the men in their lives. Men are pretty awesome when they put their minds to it. But yeah, that inclusion really matters now more than ever. And okay, I'm going to be honest, I have a little bit more tape from a couple more avid readers who wanted to share thoughts on the book. So let's have a listen.
My name is Judy Johnson-Spernick, and I'm coming today from Treaty 6 territory. I am the Wellbeing Coordinator in the College of Law at the University of Saskatchewan and faculty in the College of Education, where I lecture on all things health and mental health.
Tasha Lauren Dishnakasham, North Battleford, Métis Nation, Saskatchewan, Achinia. Hi, my name is Lauren Tracci. I'm from North Battleford, Saskatchewan. I'm from the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. Also a part-time assistant professor at the College of Law at the University of Saskatchewan, as well as a practicing lawyer. I'm general counsel with the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan.
I read the book through the lens of what it's like to be a woman, not just a woman in law, because I don't have a law degree and I am a woman in the law school. However, I serve in the role of a well-being coordinator. I support mental health, and I just opened the book with the lens of, what is it like to be a woman in a leadership position? And what really was a key takeaway from almost all of the chapters was that juxtaposition between the warrior in us and the wounded in us. And I think that can resonate, it's something with all of us. They're a part of our reality in the workplace, personal, professional lives.
I felt a lot of emotions reading it. I felt there were pieces where I could cry reading it because it was just so real. I could really relate to it and really see myself in it. The Courtney Phillips piece, she is an Indigenous lawyer, and she talked about her experience entering law school and, the impacts of that. And I was able to, a generation later, I was also able to see that her experiences that she was experiencing at the time she attended law school, I was also experiencing. It was the first time that I can see on paper, that other people could see that too on paper, how brave it was to come out and say, this was my experience and this is what happened to me and this is how it made me feel.
Going back to what Lauren was saying about Courtney Phillips' chapter and the whole healing aspect of reading stories like this and coming into ourselves, Courtney ended her chapter with something like, what a gift it is to be seen and heard. And, women and really any marginalized person in our colonial white male dominated system, we need safe spaces to talk about ourselves, to share our feelings, to be heard. The book allows you to see yourself, and seeing yourself in other strong women leaders is key to I would say many people, but women especially, our mental health, our well-being, our ability to be leaders in the workplace and just be human in those spaces. And those questions that come with that in terms of, do I fit? How do I fit? Do I belong? How do I belong? What's my purpose? Who am I here in this space? And then the book, generally speaking, pulling back to the big picture, was like walking with a mentor that had this resounding yes. You can bring strength and vulnerability to the workplace, and it will be and can be honored.
I think women go through a lot. We just handle so much, and there's just so much strength in that. And then seeing these stories on paper and everyone, being vulnerable in sharing those stories for all of us to read, and it's like peering into the journals of these individuals, especially when they're, speaking to their younger self. I often live my life by saying, would my younger self be proud of what I'm doing right now? Would my younger self be proud of this decision I'm going to make? And whenever I say yes, it's like a huge check mark because that little girl would be proud. So anyways, I'm also almost 9 months pregnant, and I feel more woman than I've ever felt in my entire life. Being able to carry my baby, and I think reading this book now that I'm a mom, it would be so different than when I read it the first time.
We're getting stronger and stronger, and that's just what it's all about. That's the message Lauren, I know, is going to pass on to her child, and all of us want to pass on to those that we live and work with.
That's Judy Johnson-Sfernock and Lauren Trotchy. What's going through your mind right now?
So, Leah mentioned previously that we conducted an impact survey on both the book and podcast, where overall the results demonstrated that reflective storytelling validates lived experience, fosters empowerment, creates momentum for cultural and systemic change within the legal profession. And I was reminded of these results when both Lauren and Judy brought up the concept of seeing yourself in the stories, which highlights, in my role in the access to justice world, the kind of systemic angle to the book, the power of shared experiences, shifting the focus from individual struggles and triumphs to systemic issues and opportunities. That storytelling helps reveal truths that may otherwise remain hidden.
Leah, I could see you listening, especially to Lauren, mentioning, okay, she's pregnant, she's expecting, okay, would my little child be proud of this? What's going through your mind just thinking about that, what we just heard?
Well, my very first thought was, I'm so glad I know those two and get to work with them. They're both fantastic friends and colleagues. And we did spend quite a bit of time with them and Beth. We had formed a writing club, a kind of a supper and writing club last year as we were working on some academic articles that we're hoping to get published coming out of this piece. So we had spent quite a bit of time sitting around Beth's dining room table and Judy's dining room table and Brea's dining room table talking about all of these issues. So it made me also want to schedule another supper club meeting. But Judy's comments around staying human and being a leader, what that looks like, what it takes, really resonated. I think we can do a better job on talking about this in the profession and in particular to law students. There's one thing that I'm constantly saying to the students I teach is that your core values should incorporate humility and curiosity, and that they need to be well aware of the fact that they are going to be receiving a degree, which is putting them in positions of power, or at least giving them access to people with power and with influence, and they need to use that wisely. I also really appreciated Lauren's question of what would my younger self think, or would my younger self be proud of me, and thought that's such a great compass to check in with ourselves as we move through our careers. And I'm also happy to share that Lauren brought a beautiful baby boy into the world in September. Yes. So congratulations to Lauren and her family from the Dear Beth team.
We've heard about the kitchen table at the house where you grew up, at your mom's table. And just listening to that tape, what went through your head?
I think, again, it's all about connection and that basic notion of bringing people together and sharing conversation and great food. She was an amazing cook. She also would often cook things that she knew people would enjoy. So she would, and sometimes that meant cooking multiple things to ensure that everybody got something they loved. But if I imagine the moments when I got to sit at that table with friends and family, and just the joy that I could see on my mom's face in hosting people. And I think that the value that comes with stepping away from regular life and just coming together to share time with each other and support each other and learn about each other. Those are the things I think about when I imagine sitting around that table.
Well, did you get a chance to meet Judy Johnson-Sfernock through your mom?
I did. It was about 5 weeks before Mom passed away. And Judy is a person that my mom had been talking about a lot since she arrived at the college. And talking about from the perspective of Judy was somebody Mom very much admired, but also somebody she very much believed would be a person I could relate to well. I think Judy and I have a shared love of well-being. And so, it's something that I've been very passionate about. My first plan was to be a clinical psychologist, and then I ended up going into law school. But I've worked in the space of labor and employment law, which really has allowed me to, and now privacy law, which really has allowed me to focus on the human element of the legal disciplines. And through the course of that work, I've also been able to weave in a lot of thinking and contemplation around well-being, because certainly much of what I've dealt with through the course of my career in labor and employment law relates to decision-making and difficult situations that people are in. I've also, through the course of my master's degree, spent time researching the notion of dignity and how that can be protected through the legal process. So how does human dignity reflect in decisions, and particularly in things like wrongful dismissal cases, for example? How do we protect dignity in those situations?
So your mom is the matchmaker who brought you and Judy together.
Absolutely.
How did she do this?
So she arranged for us to go out to Judy's house. It was this beautiful, perfect summer day, the, bright, big blue prairie sky and a bright sunshine. We sat in Judy's sunroom and chatted about her work and my interest in well-being and how well-being intersects in the workplace. And we just had this wonderful couple of hours together. And I came away from that conversation feeling more energized than I had in a very long time. And it was a great reminder of what I really am passionate about and where my interests are. But I also felt that I'd met a kindred spirit in many ways, and was reminded of the importance of connection and how impactful that can be. My mom directed a lot of energy into helping people find connections with one another, and she often did bring new combinations of people together in an intentional way. So if we go back to that dining room table, she would bring people together who'd never met, but who she knew very well, because she felt that they might have a shared interest or something to learn about each other. And I think those moments with Judy in late June of this year reflect the gift that can come with new connections. They also reminded me of the importance of pursuing work that you really care about, and how all of those interests can guide a very fulfilling life.
I love that in the obituary your family put together for your mom, she was described as a thoughtful and relentless giver of gifts. How did you see that playing out? Was that just the gift of bringing people together, the gift of caring about her community, not leaving when she could, but that real commitment to public service? But did she actually give real physical gifts too?
She did, and they were wonderful, and they were always very thoughtful gifts. I think one of my favorite stories I heard shortly after Mom passed away from a friend of hers who had gone through her Canadian citizenship ceremony, and this person went back to her office one day, and she had been talking to Mom about how excited she was to become a Canadian citizen. And she arrived at her office one morning to find a package on her desk, which was a piece of cloth, and she unwrapped it, and it was a pile of books about the prairies in Canada, and the piece of material that these books were wrapped in was a Canadian flag. So she really put a lot of thought into gifts that she gave people, and they always had some kind of meaning and care behind them.
Were you ever the recipients of thoughtful and relentless gift giving?
Absolutely. When my husband and I bought our mid-century modern home, she really leaned into that, which I super appreciated as, we were decorating our new home. And I think many listeners and each of us in this room could relate to her giving of books in particular. And whenever I'd receive a stack of books from Beth, I'd look through and I'm like, what's she trying to teach me?
There's a message. She's Ted Lassoing this.
I received a big gift of books from Beth after we had a bad house fire in my home in 2024, and I lost everything I owned, including all my books. And I, at one point, had said to Beth after the house fire that one of the things I was grieving the most and losing everything was my books. I love my books. I keep my books. I keep them on shelves. They mean things to me. And I know that she views books the same way, too. We shared that common love of books. And it was probably 6 months, or maybe right after the fire, she said, at some point, you should come shop my bookshelves. And I said, okay, sure. And then about a year later, when I was finally back in our home, then she sent me another follow-up email, because I wasn't about to follow up with her and say, when can I come over and take all your books? But she followed up with me and said, you should come over. It was spring. You should come over one day and shop my bookcases. So I remember doing that. I had gone to see my grandmother for Mother's Day, and then I stopped at Beth's on the way home and exchanged 12 tulips for 4 or 5 crates of books. So I did. I took her quite literally when she said, please shop my bookshelves. And she had amazing bookshelves, and she had boxes all ready for me, like all prepared to go. And she just kept sending me boxes and saying, fill this up, fill this up. And I took home a ton and restocked all my bookshelves with her books, which has been fun to read, because now when I pull a book off the shelf, it's a Beth book usually. And then I took the extra books, things I didn't have space for in my own house, and then brought them to the little free library I had created at the College of Law several years ago, and stocked that free library up. And now we've changed the name of that little free library to the Beth Bilson Little Free Library. So her gift of books lives on at the law school and in my home and in other people's homes as well.
Oh, that is so fitting. I love it. And before we have to get going here, I want to bring back Justice Georgina Jackson just for a moment.
What is the continuing relevance of creating a seat at the table? I think the book is a key part of the conversation, or better still, and a better way of looking at it, it's a key part of the education we all need. We need to hear continually and repeatedly from young people, in this case, law students, young lawyers, and lawyers in mid-career as well, about how are we doing on the equality file? Are we getting it right? Have we got the right balance? And how could we be doing things better? I think that conversation, of which the book is a catalyst, makes this book particularly relevant in our times. I found that perhaps the greatest strength of the book may be in what it has created and will create after it.
Justice Georgina Jackson. Okay, so what is the next chapter for creating a seat at the table?
Well, first of all, I just so deeply respect Justice Jackson and really appreciated her comment that the book is a catalyst and that the greatest strength of the book is what it has created and will create after it. The next chapter, I would hope for the future that we could actively engage more male allies. You know, we've talked about that a bit this episode in co-creating sustainable, inclusive, and impactful solutions. We've talked in previous episodes about our interest in greater intersectionality, and so a dream of mine would be to help facilitate continuation of telling of stories that represents more diverse voices at the table. And I think in order to do so, I hope there's additional support from listeners that arises to continue this important work to enhance working conditions for women in law.
If I lived in a utopia, I guess, going back to that workshop question we asked, what would your utopian future look like for women in law? But on this project, in a world of infinite time and resources, I would love to do more volumes of this book. When we initially started talking about creating this kind of a book, the Drop Threads series was a huge inspiration for us, and the idea that women have stories to tell, and they can be just short stories, but things that need to be said. And Drop Threads was a huge success, the first volume, and I think now there's 4. So kind of the same thing too, there's more stories, there's more to be said. So in a world of infinite resources and time, I would be happy to help produce some more volumes and, like Brea said, expand the voices that are sharing their stories there. I'd love to see the book being increasingly incorporated into a variety of classes at law schools. I think that's really important, and I think it also, the book and the podcast, I would love to see them being used more in professional development training for active lawyers too. So I think that's an area of growth, and I don't think that's limited to us being the ones to have to drive that growth, because we don't have infinite time and resources, but I hope it could be picked up. And Again, I would love to see more community, more connections. There is power in getting together, talking to each other, and I wish we could do more podcast episodes. So those are my wishes.
I wish that we could have asked Beth to write that letter to her younger self. Kate, if she could have written that letter, what do you think she would have put in it?
I think there's so much that Mom could have told her younger self after her remarkable life, but I think there are a few key messages that she probably would have focused on. First, find something to be passionate about. When my brother and I were contemplating what to study in university and what paths to carve out for ourselves, her advice was that if we could pursue something we were truly interested in, our careers would follow. She never directed us into law or expected us to follow in her footsteps, but I think our respective legal paths ultimately came from listening to that early advice and from following our deep interests. I think service to others and how that can bring positive change would be another thing she would talk about. If I think about Mom's legacy, this concept was at the core of her life. It is in directing your focus beyond yourself that you can aspire to true goodness and fulfillment. Don't strive for titles, but focus on your actions. This particular element was something she said to one of her colleagues at the university, who now keeps that quote on her wall. And I think it perfectly underpins the foundational approach that Mom took in her career and particularly in her life as a leader. In the roundtable episode of the podcast, Mom spoke about the importance of looking for your people. In part, her advice relates to the fact that there will be difficult days, but with the right community around you, those days will not be insurmountable. In that podcast, Mom also reflected on the need to build relationships and that sometimes you'll have to depend on people who don't obviously seem to fit into your group. Sometimes those are the people who will become your best champions and allow you to create the outcome or future that you want. I think she would also say, don't assume that there is only one answer or perspective. We can always learn from listening to each other. And a story that I think about in this particular case came at her memorial service, where one of the speakers who she worked with through the United Way was talking about how Mom really reminded people that they needed different voices at the table. And there was a big initiative that they were working on together, which Mom wouldn't start the conversation on until she had younger voices and diverse voices there so that everyone could really understand what was needed in that particular moment. I think Mom would also repeat the ideas that she shared in the Roundtable podcast about how we each have our life and we only get one. As a result, it's important to think about what you really want to do, about where you belong, and how those elements will allow you to make a contribution that helps you serve your profession, yourself, and the people and public around you. And perhaps the last thing I'll share is that I think she would say something along the lines of the words from Ralph Waldo Emerson that we used in the Order of Service booklet at her memorial service. Be good to your work, your word, and your friend.
Oh, Kate, that's beautiful. That one I can remember. Thank you. That's Kate Bilson. We have Leah Howie and Brea Lowenberger with us. I've got to say, it was a pleasure having us all back in the same room today. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
A very special thank you also to McKercher LLP and to Kate Bilson, whose support and generosity made this episode possible. And if you'd like to grab a copy of the book we keep talking about, Creating a Seat at the Table, Reflections from Women in Law, well, it's available through the University of Regina Press, McNally Robinson, and Coles, Turning the Tide, Indigo, you name it, you can probably go and find it there and buy it. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Beth Bilson and her work, go check those show notes. Make sure you've downloaded the episode. We will have a whole bunch of good links for you there. I'm your host, Jen Quesnel. Thanks for listening.